Hello everyone, Editing Vince here from deep within the confines of the editing bunker.
So basically it's chair at the desk.
Yes, thank you. For those of you wondering, it's just to the left of the broadcasting tower and down the stairs, don't mind the spiral.
And the spiders.
And the spiders, yes. The point of this little message is just to warn you in advance that today's episode does have some mild triggers in the form of suicide being mentioned, and generally the story being more problematic when viewed from a modern perspective in terms of the interactions between characters. We've kept it all very mild, so it should be at a minimum, but just to warn you in advance if that's something you're sensitive to. Okay, I will now hand over to Us from the Past.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Autocrat. This is episode 31, Psyche. Before we get into this, I just wanted to say welcome to all the new person joining us, and I hope you've been enjoying the first part of a collaboration that is currently on Eastern Roman History YouTube. The part 2 is coming very soon on our channel, so keep an eye out for this, it's gonna be great. And just as a reminder, we can be found on our website, and we can be found on Instagram and every platform you can think of. So let's get into this. This is episode 31, Psyche.
As my co-host said, welcome to all our new listeners. It's incredible how much of a response that video's had, and we hope you enjoy part 2 and upcoming episodes. So, are you ready to learn about Psyche?
I am.
We are going to be using a Roman source for the story today, and the source is a man called Apuleius in his story The Golden Ass. It's a donkey, it's not what you're thinking of. That's literally the name of the source. This story, the one of Psyche, is basically set within a larger framing narrative that we are not going to be covering because today's episode is long enough as it is. Now, just as an aside, before we start talking about the story itself, we are going to be leaving out the numerous times that Psyche tries to kill herself during this story when she thinks that something is hopeless or when something goes wrong. Because, well, we don't want to keep mentioning that. Just know it happens multiple times and is most prominent during her tasks, and quite often there'll be something inanimate which talks to her to save her or guide her. So if this happens, regardless of who or what is doing it, it probably means Psyche has tried to kill herself, but we haven't mentioned it. Anyway, on to the story itself. To start our story, there's a kingdom, don't worry about which one, the story itself certainly doesn't, and the king and queen there have 3 daughters. The youngest one was apparently so beautiful that it couldn't be described in words. People would gather and worship her as Aphrodite. Word spread, in fact, that either Aphrodite was come down to Earth as a human, or else that the Earth had created another Aphrodite where the water had made the first one. You remember the story in episode 1 from the sea foam created from the genitals of Uranus dropping into the sea?
Yes.
Yes, so that was the water creating Aphrodite, apparently. People flocked from all over, and Aphrodite's temples were neglected. This made the real Aphrodite, who was definitely not this daughter, angry. She was angered that she had to share worship with a mere mortal, and she references that it did her a fat lot of good to have a shepherd deem her prettier than the other goddesses, so that's not helping her now. The reason I bring this allusion up is that this shepherd is a reference to Paris, from the Judgment of Paris, where he judges 3 goddesses, which leads up to the Trojan War, so apparently that's already happened in this Roman story. Now, on to what exactly Aphrodite does about it. Do you want to take it from there?
Aphrodite called her son Eros to her. This is the winged god who fires arrows and is generally portrayed as committing havoc with his love arrows. She asked Eros to make Psyche fall in love with someone hideous. Jealous much.
Yep.
There's then a weird passage describing how Aphrodite kisses her son with mouth open for a long time before travelling into the sea with a retinue including the Nereids.
Yeah, that was a pretty weird passage. I wasn't sure what to make of that at all.
Let's now pan over to Psyche and see how she's handling this.
Okay.
Well, she's not handling it very well.
Right.
Her elder sisters were both married while she was not. And she started to wonder why. Why wasn't she married? Why couldn't she find someone?
Yeah.
Well, people came to admire her, but like you'd admire a statue or I guess a pretty landscape rather than a human being. which is pretty objectifying.
Yeah.
She became lonely and hated her own beauty. Because she wasn't finding anyone or getting married, her father saw that maybe it meant that the gods were unhappy with her. So he travelled to the temple of Apollo in Miletus to ask for a husband for Psyche. Apollo answered that she would be married to something snake-like and terrible, which even Zeus was afraid of.
Right, that's not the answer you want as a father.
He also got told that Psyche should be abandoned on top of a mountain to be left for her husband to get her.
Right.
The king told the queen, and there was mourning, but it was done.
Yeah, I suppose you can't do much to a direct order from a god.
Yeah, I guess. During the wedding preparations, before being left on the mountain, Psyche cried out that their unhappiness was due to her prettiness and that Aphrodite was the reason she was being ruined. I mean, she's not wrong.
No, not technically.
She cited being eager for her husband to come get her. She was left on the rock, scared and alone. However, Zephyr, which is the wind, picked her up and carried her to a valley. Psyche slept there for a while before looking around. She saw a park with trees and a spring. There was a palace in the middle of the park built by godlike architects. It was a magnificent palace with gold pillars and wood and ivory ceilings. The floors were also mosaic made of gemstones.
Wow.
Quite beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, I think the general impression from that passage, which I skipped quite a bit of, is just, it's a very beautiful palace.
She then went exploring. And then something happened. What happened?
Well, a voice without a body then appeared, telling her the house was hers, and the voices would be her servants. She ate and drank nectar, was sung to, and had a lyre played for her, all by the servants who didn't have bodies. I'm not quite sure how they played a lyre, but there you go.
Isn't nectar supposed to be reserved for the gods?
I think so. There is an allusion to it later on. I'm not sure why she's getting nectar at this stage. It doesn't seem to have any impact, but oh well. Psyche went to bed at the end of the day, tired, but she then felt something join her in the bed, and quite obviously she was afraid. I think the story implies the husband slept with her and left before the sun came up. Now, this will only become clear later on in the actual text, but she can't see her husband, which is pretty horrifying as a concept.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. I wouldn't like something creeping up in my bed that I can't see.
No, especially given the not outright said but implied subtext of what happens.
Yes.
Anyway, time passed and Psyche became used to the situation. In the meantime, her parents grieved and her sisters came back to their parents, competing for their attention. If you remember, they're both married, so they're living elsewhere. One night, Psyche was told by her husband that her sisters would soon be on the way to the mountain where she was taken by Zephyr, thinking that she was dead. Her husband asked her not to respond to their grief, or even look at them, or bad things would happen. All sounding very healthy so far as a marriage.
Yeah, very much so.
Psyche said yes, but spent the following day grieving at her isolation, presumably triggered by being reminded of her sisters and thereby her former life, I suppose. That night, her husband came early to bed and noticed she was still distressed. He basically admonished her for torturing herself and basically told her to do what she wanted, but that she'd be sorry.
Threatening much?
Yeah, this feels very problematic in the modern day. So, bit of a trigger warning here. Psyche retaliated in turn by begging and threatening to kill herself if she wasn't allowed to see her sisters. What a healthy marriage. Anyway, her husband said yes, fine, and allowed her to give gifts to her sisters. However, he told her that no matter what her sisters said, she shouldn't try to find out what he looked like. The implication is basically that this would wreck their marriage, and the husband would not allow this.
So does she not know what he's supposed to be looking like?
No, she has no idea who this husband is.
So I'm guessing he's either invisible to her, or they live in the constant dark?
Yes, I think from what we'll see later that it is dark and she only sees him at night when the lights are off. She asked him to ask Zephyr, in turn, to bring the sisters to the palace, and he agreed. The next day, when the sisters were up on the mountain grieving, Psyche called out to the sky saying that they shouldn't grieve and that she was alive, ordering Zephyr to bring them to her. They were shown round all this glittering magnificence she now finds herself surrounded by, and naturally they started asking who this husband was.
Probably feeling jealous.
Yeah. Psyche remembered what she'd been told and made up something about a young man with barely a beard who spent all his days out on hunts or farming. She then wanted to distract them to stop further questions, so she weighed them down with gifts and sent them on their way, basically distracting them with shiny things. I didn't know her sisters were magpies. Do you want to take it from here?
Yes. Back home, the sisters became envious. concluding her husband was a god and she would be a goddess, while they had a husband older than them or else husband with rheumatism and unable to satisfy them. I mean, not sure what context given that they were all talking about money, but
yes,
I guess not satisfies them, materialistic girls and all that.
Maybe.
They decided therefore that they should punish their sister for this.
Again, very healthy. Punish someone for their good fortune. No problems there.
They pretended they had been grieving to their parents, so they were basically hiding that Psyche was alive, which that's not really fair.
No, so far this story is giving off a wealth of good feelings.
But back to Psyche. Her husband again warned her of the risk her sister posed and told her that she was pregnant with their child.
How did she not know this?
Maybe she's not showing yet and she doesn't know yet, but he knows because of reason.
Yeah, the pregnancy test had not yet been invented in ancient Greece, I suppose.
If she did not tell her sisters who her husband was, the kid would be a god, but it would not if she did not.
Okay.
So basically, tell your sister your kid's not a god, don't tell them your kid's a god.
Yes.
Psyche was thrilled at her motherhood and that her child might be divine.
Well, yeah, that's a good deal.
Her husband then warned her that her sister would be coming back and that she should disown them.
Seems 0 to 100 immediately.
Yeah. Psyche, for her turn, said that if she couldn't see his face, at least let her see her sisters again. Her husband therefore promised that she could see them. When her sisters returned to the palace, they asked about her husband, and Psyche accidentally told a different story about a middle-aged man with white hairs here and there who was a merchant.
Okay, so breaking the number one rule of a fake story, keep it consistent.
Yeah, at least when you tell a lie, tell the same one every time. Don't change too much detail, that's the basic of telling a lie.
Yeah, it's impressive she managed to get every single detail completely the other way round.
Also, don't lie, people. It's bad.
And don't get into problematic marriages with beings you can't see who are supposed to be hideous according to a prophecy.
Exactly. They left and came back for a third visit, telling Psyche her husband was actually a huge snake reminding her of the prophecy.
Just spreading gossip and rumour.
Do tell us about what they said next.
Well, based on the sisters making these large claims about surely he's a snake, think about the prophecy, she became afraid and confessed she'd never actually seen his face. The sisters also said, adding extra fear into the equation, that once the child was born, he would eat her, so he only needs her for the child, after that she's disposable. They told her to bring a knife to the bed and light a lamp once her husband was asleep. So, the next night, she did this. And what do you think she found?
A big monster snake?
No, she in fact found Eros himself.
Oh!
Overcome with wonder, she tried to hide the knife by her chest, but it fell from her hands. She then started handling his famous bow and arrows, curious as she was. She then went back to the bed, lost control, and began kissing him sensually and fleetingly, afraid he would wake up, which, if you're afraid, why are you tempting fate like this? Regardless, as she did so, a drop of oil fell from the lamp onto Eros. He woke up with a start, as you would when boiling hot oil drops onto you, saw that his trust had been betrayed because, well, she's looking at him in the lamplight, and he flew out of the window. Psyche tried to hang on to his leg as he flew out, but eventually fell off, exhausted. Eros turned, alighted in a cypress tree nearby, and told her his story. Aphrodite had, as we discussed earlier, asked him to make her fall in love with someone horrible. However, Eros pricked himself on one of his arrows and fell in love with her instead. He said he tried to warn her against seeing him as a monster and cutting his head off, which she wasn't doing that in any way. It seems an odd detail, but still. Because of her betrayal, he would leave, which he did. She became grief-stricken, and there's an incident I'm just going to say we're skipping over here.
Yeah.
After this incident, Psyche continued on her way and eventually ended up at the kingdom of her sister's husband. Psyche told her sister everything, but added the detail that Eros had said he would marry the sister, which he didn't in any way. The sister then made up a story about her parents' death to her husband to have an excuse to leave her husband's kingdom, and travelled to the mountain where Psyche had been taken to. Trigger warning again, she then implored Zephyr to take her to Eros and jumped off the mountain. Fairly obviously, she fell to her death and apparently became food for the birds. Now, I think Psyche did this deliberately, given that the second sister suffered the same fate, so Psyche goes round to both sisters, spreading the false story that Eros wants to marry them, and they jump to their deaths on the mountain where she was taken. So that's the sisters abruptly out of the story.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Psyche herself searched for Eros, as he had hidden in Aphrodite's house to heal his wounds. A white bird told Aphrodite about the rumours of Eros being close to death and wounded. Basically, her family was being slandered. Aphrodite angrily asked who this mistress of Eros was who'd caused all this, and lost it when she found out that it was Psyche, the very same girl who had stolen all her worship a while back.
She stole her heroes.
Yes, she wounded her son, rumours have now started, and this is the same girl who injured her pride before. So, do you want to tell us what exactly Aphrodite did with this information?
She ran home and gave her son a dressing down for going against her. She said she could have a better son, and basically disown Eros.
Yeah.
And give that new son Eros wings and weapons.
I think she even threatens to make a servant her son instead, right? Instead of these grand gestures of, I could have a different son, I don't need you.
Yeah. She describes him as an insolent boy who isn't afraid of his stepfather, presumably Ares, before rushing out.
Right.
She met Zeus and Hera and asked them to find Psyche. They basically ask, what's so terrible about Eros casting his eye around? Apuleius is at pains to say that they're behind him because they're afraid, but we could have predicted Zeus being in favour of philandering.
Yeah, I mean, fear of Eros' consequences, or just defending the idea of casting your eye around. Presumably Hera is staring at Zeus at this point, tapping her foot impatiently.
Aphrodite was angry and moved on.
Yeah.
Psyche, meanwhile, travelled to a temple in hopes of finding her husband there. She found a bunch of corn and harvesting implement left there, which Psyche sorted out. During this, she heard Demeter's voice telling her that Aphrodite was angry with her. She then began to cry and asking for her help. Demeter agreed to let her live and not take her prisoner.
Nice enough.
Yeah. She then travelled to a temple in the valley and prayed to Hera asking for help. Hera appeared and said she would like to help but couldn't go against Aphrodite. Maybe she's afraid of her.
Yeah.
Psyche then determined she should ask Aphrodite for forgiveness, thinking this was the only way out. What is Aphrodite doing in the meantime?
Well, meanwhile, Aphrodite recruited Hermes to help her and told him to trumpet out a reward for anyone who found Psyche. As a result, everyone wanted this reward. However, it steeled Psyche's resolve, so she travelled to Aphrodite's house. Now, Aphrodite did not give her the reception you might have hoped for because she had her whipped, mocked her for having a child who was basically illegitimate, if Aphrodite would even allow her to have it in the first place, and then attacked her herself. She then took a load of mixed grains and said that since Psyche could only earn love by tasks, I assume this means her forgiveness, but I'm not sure, she needed to sort all of these things out by the evening. Psyche was stunned, because of how difficult the task was, but apparently ants took pity on her and sorted them, to Aphrodite's fury.
I'm sure Aphrodite wouldn't have liked that.
No, it's not exactly the way out you would have hoped for, if you're giving out these tasks. She rebuked Psyche and gave her a crust of bread to eat, while Eros was kept in solitary confinement. In the morning, Aphrodite took Psyche out to a field and showed her gold wool sheep which lived there. She told her to fetch her a lock of wool. Now, a reed talked to Psyche for reasons I'm sure you can possibly think of. They'd advised her not to approach the sheep now, as they were fierce, but instead wait until the day became less hot and then pluck the wool that stuck to shrubs, so get the wool that way. Aphrodite said that for the second time, this was basically just Eros' doing, which I assume is why he's in solitary confinement, just to make sure he can't interfere. The third task was to bring some water that fed into the Styx and the Cocytus. This was very difficult, apparently, because of the steepness and the rocks, and apparently the dragons guarding it. She thus despaired, but an eagle from Zeus then appeared and got her the water. The eagle made it easier for himself by pretending to be there on the orders of Aphrodite, so getting round the dragons that way. Still, Aphrodite was not satisfied. She asked Psyche to get enough beauty from Persephone in the underworld to last at minimum a day. As with the last task, Psyche then despaired. However, the tower she was climbing at the time asked her not to despair. Again, I'm sure you can extrapolate why. Anyway, she got down to the underworld, successfully paid off the ferryman, stopped Comparatist, the dog of Hades, barking with cakes, and got the beauty. However, on the way back, she decided to open the box and take a little bit of beauty herself, in order to make herself more beautiful for Eros.
Like she wasn't beautiful enough.
Yeah, this is kind of the whole premise of the story, but still. Inside the box, though, she only found a deathly sleep, and collapsed. We now pan over to Eros. Do you want to take it away?
Yes. he has now recovered and doesn't want to be away from her anymore.
Took him long enough?
Yeah, he's probably like, okay, fair enough, I can forgive her. He got out of his confinement, flew over to Psyche, and put the slip back in its box. It's that easy, guys.
Yeah.
He then woke her up by poking her with one of his arrows, like this. No, you can't see what I'm doing, that's fine.
No. My shoulder can feel it, though.
He told her to finish the task and that he would take care of the rest before flying off. He flew up to Olympus and pleaded with Zeus. Zeus, in spite of being continuously hassled and disrespected by heroes in the past, agreed.
Yep.
Incidentally, this text ascribes Zeus' pursuits to heroes, so kind of shifting the blame a bit.
Yeah, so it's not Zeus's fault that he went after these mortal women, it was Eros.
Yes. He then undoes this by saying that Eros has to repay him by bringing a pretty girl to him if he sees one.
Okay, so we had the shifting blame, and now it's immediately back on Zeus. He wasted that. That's gone.
Exactly. Zeus then ordered Hermes to summon all the gods to Olympus and to fine them 10,000 sesterces if absent.
Okay, so we have a specific Roman currency there. I'm sure you could work out how much that is modern day. I didn't for the purposes of this research, but hey, fun detail.
Zeus then decreed that Eros and Psyche should be married. Okay.
Yep.
He also gave Psyche ambrosia, which made her immortal. Her marriage to Eros would therefore be a bond forever. There was a big feat, and in time their daughter was born. This daughter was called Hedone.
Okay.
Hedone is the root word of the word hedonism. This is the idea that pleasure is the ultimate goal of human life.
Okay. I think Hedone is actually pleasure herself, personified.
Yeah.
Well, kind of a happy ending there. I'm not sure how I feel about this story.
It's a special story.
I didn't know much about it going into it. I'd seen summaries by, for example, Overly Sarcastic Productions or TED-Ed, and it was not portrayed as problematic as this.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting seeing the actual text. But on that note, that's the end of today's episode. Thank you all very much for listening, and do be sure to check out part 2 of our collaboration with Eastern Roman history, and we will be discussing the worst Byzantine emperors.
And it's coming in the next few days.
Yes, so keep an eye open for that.
Have a great week, everyone.
Yeah, have a great week.
What did you think about this episode?
Again with that. I thought it was an interesting story.
Yeah?
Yeah. You're going to cut me off mid-sentence, aren't you?
No,
Well,
I'm not.
There's no way you would ever do that. I mean, that would be ridiculous.
I'm not. I'm just talking with you about how did you like this, did you like the recording. We haven't recorded in a while, so how did you feel about it?